In this video, I'm going to tell you about the worst habit that a wargamer can have, both in playing and in hobby. We all have habits in all kinds of different areas of our life, and we all also know that habits are hard to break, whether it's in fitness or your diet or your work or in your, things, interactions with your family, all these different kind of habits. The reason that they're a habit is because it's something that you do all the time and you keep doing it over and over again. And trying to change your brain is a struggle, but it's how you grow as a person or whatever. But in wargaming, we also have habits. We have things that we do. Maybe the habit is we always play the same game. Maybe the habit is we always paint the same way. Maybe the habit is we always get angry when we lose at a tournament or things like that. There's all these different things that we do, lots of different habits all throughout the hobby, but there's one that I think is most important, and it works for both hobbyists, painters and that kind of stuff, and also for players, for competitive type people. There are times when I want to get something painted during a weekend, when you've got off from work or whatever, and it doesn't get done. And then you look at it and you go, okay, well, I really had to clean my airbrush, and so that was the problem. Or, it was really too humid to do the priming with the rattle can, or it was, my brushes were all screwed up, or my paint had dried out, or whatever the issue is. I didn't have my glue that I thought that I had. I left it at Bob's house, and so I couldn't glue these guys together. There's all these different things. Some people will call them excuses, and I'll get to more of that in a bit. But it's not just in hobby. It's also in playing the war games themselves. How many times have you lost a game and blamed it on the dice? Pretty frequently. Most of us have done it. The thing is that it's not the dice's fault. It's not your airbrush's fault. It's not how humid it is outside fault that you can't prime. The fault, and this is the bad habit that we don't do, the fault, you have to understand, is your own. Blaming everything else other than yourself for your shortcomings in the hobby is the bad habit that we all in wargaming need to break. Now, some of you may say, actually, that's probably a habit that we all need to break in our general lives. And I don't disagree, but this channel is generally talking about wargaming. So I'm going to relate this whole kind of idea to wargaming. You are the CEO of your wargaming. In, business, a good CEO understands that no matter what happens in the business, it is their fault. If this one person does this one thing, you could just blame that person and say, well, it's that person's fault. But in reality, a good CEO knows that they hired the person who hired the person who hired the person who hired that person. And so therefore, it all comes down to them. It's their fault. Passing the buck is never good in a corporation like that from the CEO, from the top down. And so they need to take, basically take the blame for that. That's the whole point. You need to take the blame for your wargaming issues. Whether it's hobby, whether it's playing, there's a lot of reasons why constantly trying to blame other things is the wrong way to do it in your wargaming, because it's not going to help anything. But I hear you saying, Uncle Adam, the dice, they have failed me during this critical roll, in this critical turn, this critical game during this critical tournament. And I have to say back to you, do you ever notice that when you go to the big tournaments, the big, your Adepticons, your LVO, your Nova Open, you see the same players in the top tier over and over and over again. You see the same people in the top 8 or whatever. And do you think that they're just lucky? Do you think that they're just luckier than everybody else and their dice never fail them? Because as it turns out, that's not actually the case. What happens is that the really good players understand that they have to mitigate the dice, because they can't control the dice. They have to mitigate their opponent and work around that, because they can't control their opponent. So they control everything else that they can control up to that. And if they do it well enough, and they do it repeatedly, eventually they will start to get better, and they will start to win. And that's why you see the people who are really good winning more and more frequently in this top 8 or whatever at these big tournaments, even though they're using the same type of dice that everybody else is using. When you understand that there are things outside your control, you work harder on the things that you can. And that's what the really good players at the big tournaments do. They don't blame the dice. They don't blame their opponent or the venue or anything like that. The big best players have a tendency to understand the game super well, and they know how to build their lists and go through all that kind of stuff. And then they understand how to mitigate the things they can't control. In hobby, it's exactly the same thing. You can sit there and say, well, I really wanted to get that stuff done this weekend, but this didn't work out, or that didn't work out, or my brushes or my airbrush, or, it was too humid to prime, or whatever. And, these things are actually true. Sometimes these things happen, but your airbrush got all clogged up. Why? Is it because you didn't properly clean it and maintain it last time? Probably. Your brushes are messed up. Why? Again, maintaining the brushes is an important part of the job. Just letting them sit there in the cup and then coming back later and going, I really wanted to paint, but my brushes are all messed up. There's a reason for that. It's because of your actions, and you can't blame the brushes or the airbrush or things like that just to say, well, I didn't get this done because of that. Same thing with any of your supplies. Now, you're saying, yeah, but what about the humidity? I can't control the weather. Well, some of us can, but most people can't. You're right. If you cannot control the weather, you can control backup plans and maybe not wait until, you kind of know when the humid time in your neck of the woods probably is going to be. And so you might look into trying to plan to maybe have gotten that stuff primed a month ago when you knew it wasn't going to be primed or, too humid. The other thing also, this is what I did, is when humidity and cold and all kinds of things outside started kind of steering how much hobby I got done over the winter or even in the summer because of the humidity, I bought an airbrush so I could prime in the middle of winter or in the middle of 95% humidity. Now, I also have to keep that airbrush clean so I can still use it in those situations. But again, blaming your tools, going out and saying, well, I got to buy new brushes, I got to buy new glue, I got to do this. Doing all those things is not a good idea for the whole root to this issue. And the root to this whole issue, it's up here. When you start to blame yourself for any failings in your wargaming, and to be fair, again, any time in life really, when you start to blame yourself and not blame the tools, not blame other people, not blame whatever, the humidity, when you blame yourself, it starts to train your brain to be more successful, to do things right, to think ahead, to clean your airbrush, to plan more for the humid time of the year, to build a list that's going to work a little bit better and test it before you go to the tournament where you might roll poorly, but maybe not so poorly that you still don't get in the top 8. These types of things, when you push it off on other people, when you push it off on other objects, inanimate objects or whatever, and say, that's the problem, that's where I'm going to put the blame, not on me, you then don't think about how to fix it. You go, well, there's nothing I could have done, the airbrush. When you put that blame on yourself, you say, I couldn't do it because of the airbrush, which I didn't clean. It's my fault. I should go ahead and do that. I did not win this tournament or even place because I didn't spend enough time working on my list. I didn't spend enough time practicing. And so then when the dice failed me, I lost. The pushing the blame onto other people causes you to not make those connections in your head that the problem is with you, and it doesn't allow you to fix those issues. You need to spend the time in your hobby looking at the reasons that you fail. You don't get things done on time, you don't do well in a tournament, whatever. And then understand that when you blame yourself for all of these issues, you will then train your brain to start to try to figure out how to fix those problems ahead of time so that they won't crop up as easily again. Training your brain, putting the blame on yourself is really the answer to being able to make better headway with the hobby, whether you're trying to get an army painted, whether you're trying to learn a new game, whether you're trying to do better at local tournaments or go to a big tournament and try to place or something like that. Putting the blame on yourself trains yourself to make the changes in your wargaming and in your life, let's just say that can help you further down the road so that you succeed more. So for a lot of fun, just take some time and go back and look at your failures. Let's start with just wargaming. Go back and look at some of your failures, both on the playing side and the hobby side, and figure out, okay, well, what was the problem there? I will tell you in pretty much every situation, it can trace back to you, but to start to understand that and move forward and change your habit from pushing the blame off onto people and things and pulling the blame back to yourself and saying, this is my fault, this is my job to fix, that will help you in the long run to be able to get more stuff painted, to do better at tournaments, and like I've kind of mentioned a couple of times here, you know, could probably use it in the rest of your life as well.